his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Motherfucker, he's on his
Hey guys, welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
How are you, Dylan?
I am incredible.
I would like to give a shout out to Angie, our newest patron, for supporting the show and sponsoring today's case.
Thank you so much, Angie.
Dylan, we don't have time to dilly-dally. We have to get down to brass tacks. It's business time. We got business.
It's business time?
We got to handle the business.
Okay.
Or the bidness.
The business.
Either way.
Well, the business tends to be more important than business.
We have a big case.
So there's no room for my thoughts and wisdom, right?
Save it for last.
Okay.
Save it for later.
Well, in the spirit of that, let's dive right in.
Daniel Harold Rawling was born May 24th, 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana, to James and Claudia. Claudia was only 19 when she married James, and 2 weeks after entering into matrimony, she discovered she was pregnant, much to her new husband's dismay.
Yes, that's 2 weeks after. Wow.
He didn't want a child, at least maybe not at this particular time, or ever.
Basically, as soon as the first time or two they were together, she got pregnant and then realized it a couple of weeks later, right?
I'm going to guess. I mean, I don't know her sexual history, but yeah, seems like it was pretty early on. Probably one of those first few encounters. Get married. Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant.
That's when she says something to the effect of, we need to talk. And there's some, even without trying, women put a tone on that every man knows, oh, this is big.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Throughout Claudia's pregnancy, James, who was a police officer, abused his wife. Claudia had a difficult delivery. The doctors had to use forceps on Danny, and there was no indication on whether this caused any kind of head injury, but it can be very dangerous. And he was left with bruising, which lasted for a very long time as an infant, newborn. James began abusing his son from an early age. As Danny began crawling, James started physically abusing the child because he didn't want the boy to be mobile. I mean, at that age, crawling, he's getting into stuff. Very normal milestone.
Yeah, and that's pretty sick to be like, I'm going to abuse him so he doesn't want to crawl around. That's crazy.
Okay, so the thing you have to know getting into the story, Dylan, is James is a fucking asshole.
To the 10th degree.
Yeah, he's like the worst of the worst, right? I mean, it's kind of no wonder his son ends up being the subject of a podcast, a true crime podcast, because he's a pretty fucking bad person.
Yeah, I tell you, when you have this kind of abuse and just a lack of love and caring someone's entire life as they're developing as a child, it can have serious repercussions on what they become as an adult.
In August of 1955, the couple welcomed a second child, Kevin. The second son seemed to get less punishment from his father. James focused in mostly on Danny. After Kevin's birth, Claudia finally got up the courage to leave James. However, she returned about 6 months later, following his pleas. Of course, he went through the whole song and dance. I'll change. I'm sorry. Things will be different if you come back. However, that was not the case. And this would become a pattern. Claudia would leave her husband only to return a few days, a couple weeks, or months later. Never permanently did she leave.
Yeah, well, I mean, that comes down to once you cross a certain line, it's just you've went too far. We're done. It's over. I know that's easier said than done sometimes for financial reasons, or you don't have a lot of support from your family. But that's just playing into his game, the leaving, him being nice, winning you back, promising to change and never do it again. And then it's just a vicious cycle. And it's almost like you're telling him it's okay to do these things because you do come back. And it's really sad.
James's temper seemed to surge at the drop of a hat. If he didn't like the way his wife or children were breathing, he would fly off the handle on them. Like, literally, I don't like the way you're breathing, and would just haul off and, like, hit them.
Oh, my God. Someone else had to live like I do with Heather. It's tough.
You're so ridiculous. You're the one that deserves that, honestly. Stupid.
Sometimes you look at me but ask me why I'm breathing like that, but you don't hit me. So
Well, no, but sometimes your breathing annoys me. You should just stop.
Okay.
Okay? So Danny learned he had to anticipate his father's moods and essentially walk on eggshells. Kind of like how I have to do with you, Dylan.
That's a damn lie.
When Danny was 5, James brought home a puppy. Danny and the puppy became fast friends. James saw this as an opportunity to further torture his son. He would abuse the animal, and eventually he kicked the dog so badly it died, reportedly in Danny's arms.
Oh, my God. That's terrible.
So not only was James abusive, but he denied affection to his sons. He told them hugging or kissing, any type of affection, was sissy stuff.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me he has that take on it. You know, I must say right quick, you've been in this situation before growing up, I think, walking on that phrase, walking on eggshells when you act like that around someone.
Yeah, it's like my whole fucking life.
Because
yeah.
you never know when or what little thing, or so you just go out of your way to not do anything at all to rock the boat because of this person's reaction. And I must say, when a person is to that level, no matter if they're an adult or child, that is full-on emotional abuse up to that point.
I had to do that with both of my parents. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I spent my entire childhood just like anticipating what was to come, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think people like...
It's terrible. It's horrible.
Well, I think people like us who do learn to kind of tiptoe around, walk on eggshells, you learn from a very early age how to read the room. And we end up calling ourselves empaths later on. But I don't think it's so much that maybe we're empaths. I mean, we might be. But we're just so in tune with other people and their emotions and their energy because it was like a self-preservation type of thing. Like we had to be.
Wow, that's a really great point. That's a really good way of putting it. I think you've just become adept at reading people and their vibes.
Like you develop a sense of perception or something when it comes to other people that it's like a tuning fork. You're so fine-tuned in other people's emotions or feelings. Their energy just completely like bowls you over.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
He also verbally and emotionally abused Danny, telling him repeatedly how he was unwanted.
Which is one of the top 3 worst things you can say to a kid. I think. That's just horrible.
By 1962, the family had moved to Columbus. Claudia left James once again for his violent behavior. She got back together with him and moved to their home in Shreveport. This cycle of making up and breaking up continued for most of Danny's childhood. Well, let's be honest, most of his life. James didn't allow the children to celebrate holidays or recognize their birthdays. It was like any tiny shred of joy or happiness was squashed by their father. He was just a fucking asshole.
Well, he's one of those people perpetually unhappy with themselves, full of self-doubt, I'm going to guess. Very probably rather insecure in certain things. And they will not allow anyone around. They won't allow themselves to be happy. These types of people, I've been around these types of people too. They self-sabotage their own happiness.
So you've met my dad.
They will not allow themselves to be happy, and by God, they will go out of their way to make sure anyone in their around them is not happy.
Suck all the love and joy and happiness like out of the room.
Well, yeah. See,
they're just like a vacuum of like doom or something, right?
Yeah, it's almost like in every room there's only so much energy, and they spend all this time creating this, angry asshole vibe that they literally do suck all the energy out of the room and everyone else.
So again, you've met my dad.
Yeah, I've met him a time or two.
When Danny was 9 years old, his mother suffered a nervous breakdown. Danny was in 3rd grade, which he failed due to excessive absences due to illness. Teachers recognized that Danny was displaying certain behaviors, Dylan, like low impulse control, seemed to have an inferiority complex, and aggressive tendencies. The school recommended that Danny receive counseling or some kind of therapy for this, but his parents never treated the problems. The only seemingly good thing in Danny's life was sharing his artistic talents with his mother. It was at this time a visiting cousin molested Danny, and he never wanted to talk about it and insisted it was only once. He got a lot going on in his life.
Yeah, I was going to say, poor Danny's been through a lot.
His young life continued under dire circumstances. So every time Claudia would leave her husband, Danny begged her not to return. Yet she always went back. When Danny was 10, James tried teaching him to drive, but grew frustrated when the boy didn't know how to operate a clutch, so he slapped him through the face. What 10-year-old knows how to operate a clutch?
You ain't dumped the clutch, Danny. What are you doing?
I know a lot of adults that don't know how to operate a clutch.
Well, the operative word is teaching.
Exactly.
And you expect someone to not know and need to learn certain things when you're teaching them something. But it was just another opportunity to be a dick to him. It didn't matter what it was.
Claudia attempted suicide in 1965 after an argument with James. Danny had walked in mid-argument and watched his mother grab a razor blade and slit her wrists. She lay on the floor bleeding. James was still beating Claudia despite her self-inflicted injury. When Danny intervened, he was assaulted. Claudia was taken to the hospital. It was after this that Danny, age 11, started getting alcohol from friends and also stealing it. He was drinking a lot. So can you imagine an 11-year-old getting drunk?
Yeah, not only experimenting with alcohol, but doing it, obviously, to numb out and not deal with his own life.
Danny would later say this was the age when he began having sexual fantasies, but they were dark, filled with violence and sadism. Another incident of violence that was particularly traumatic for Danny happened in 1966. The 12-year-old boy told his father he needed to get a haircut for school. And his dad was like kind of giving him the runaround, didn't want to give him the money, was just like being an asshole. So Danny went on his own, got the haircut, and when he returned home, his father was quite mad. He ended up shaving Danny's head and gave him a serious lashing. And at school, the kids made fun of Danny because of his bald head, calling him Sasquatch and Bigfoot, which I don't really know why those were the insults, because that literally doesn't make any sense.
That's the opposite of bald head.
Well, I was going to say, unless it's like calling, like a really big guy tiny or something.
Ah, yes.
Because he was bald, they called him Bigfoot. I don't know.
He's got so little hair, we're going to call him the legendary hairy thing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like these kids need to rethink their bullying strategy, but all the same, it was really traumatic for Danny to get picked on like this and to be just so humiliated and embarrassed. And he felt because of what his dad had done to him.
Well, yeah, obviously, I'm sure he's going to feel that way. And he can't win. He's even getting shit at school. Yeah.
The same year, James attempted to kill Claudia. The situation was miserable for everyone. Danny was discovered drinking alcohol with a friend. James grabbed him up by the neck, dragging him home, then had some of his fellow police officers come and arrest Danny. And the boy spent 2 weeks in jail.
Okay.
During this time, he refused to speak to his mother. When he was released, Danny ran away from home, spending the night in a nearby woods. However, he returned home when he realized he didn't have any options, and, of course, hunger set in. Danny was frequently masturbating to murder fantasies at this time. Danny and Kevin were handcuffed by James when they failed to cut the grass to his expectation. A neighbor witnessed James kneeling on Danny's chest and lungs until the boy was like screaming and threatening suicide.
Could you imagine having these people for neighbors? I'm feeling bad for the kids and this all-out maniac of a father, like abusing them out in the yard and stuff. I would be hard-pressed not to do something.
I've seen, not personally, like I've not lived next to these people, but my aunt has some neighbors that are just pure trash. And I've never seen them like do anything to the kids, but like there's an elder father and like his sons, and they all kind of live in these like 2 trailers across the road. Oh my gosh, it's just constant like fighting and dysfunction. I mean, there was a period, it was so often when I would be visiting, like we would just be like standing at the window, like watching.
So it was like every time.
Yeah, like watching because in a few minutes here, like came a couple sheriff's deputies. Somebody would like take off running down the road with their drugs and get tackled. I mean, it was just like always constant drama.
So just make some popcorn.
I mean, I don't know. I think I don't want to say if you grow up country, because I know a lot of country people that are good, but I think, there's a lot of dysfunction in some of these little small towns and
I was doing a fence one time.
like trailer parks and such.
The customer had his son out there helping him, and his son did something he didn't like. Well, he full on slapped this kid through the face. I mean, a backhand, and this kid's 9, 10, 11.
No, that's not going to fly.
And I was walking around the corner, and I just dropped the tool in my hand, and I said, "What the fuck?" And the guy turns around, he's like, "Oh," starts kind of explaining. I said, "Look, no offense." I said, "Would you slap that kid like that again? You're going to have to slap me." And I told this guy was the guy I was working for. But, I mean, come on. Oh, he went in the house and never came back out and never saw the poor kid again. But I'm just like...
Yeah, if I saw someone, what I felt like was abusing a child, I would definitely have to intervene and get involved.
Yeah.
But I guess when I watch adults just drunk and beating each other up in the street or whatever.
No, you can't.
I just grab the popcorn and watch.
Call the police or something if you think somebody's really in danger, but you have to be reluctant to get in between a man and a woman.
I'm never going to get in between a man and a woman.
You would be fighting as well, both of them eventually, because that's how that dysfunction works.
I guess I'm just trashy and I like to watch. So,
ooh,
Jerry Springer fan over here.
Oh, I can't do my ooh anymore, can I?
I'm not ashamed.
I'm going to do it. Oh, baby. Watch it.
I mean, we're making light, I guess, of the situation, but this is fucking horrible. Like, Danny has a terrible childhood. Probably, when we look back over all of the cases we've covered, Dylan, I would say Danny's probably had one of the worst childhoods of any killer we've talked about on the show.
Yeah, this sounds horrible, and it sounds like constant every single day.
His life is a living hell.
And yeah, poor guy.
From day one.
Poor kid.
And we can feel sorry for the child, but that doesn't necessarily mean we feel pity or, whatever for the adult, but we can feel empathy for the child. Now, Danny was growing more sexually curious after having seen a naked girl. One of his friends called him over to a neighbor's house where there happened to be a high school cheerleader that lived in the neighborhood. Stepping out of the shower, naked, they were able to kind of peek in, see her. And that was something Danny liked. So at 14, he began peeping in neighbors' windows.
Oh, my gosh.
And I've said it before, Dylan, and I'm going to say it again. There is something so disconcerting about a person obtaining sexual gratification by looking in windows.
Yeah.
Like at night or whatever, lurking around.
No, sneaking around houses and peeking in the windows when the people are unaware that you're watching is very strange to me.
Voyeurism is considered a paraphilic disorder, which refers to sexual interests, urges outside the norm. It's not exactly considered like a mental disorder, and there's no specific cause for why someone might have these voyeuristic tendencies. Of course, when James caught his son spying on people, he was beaten.
Well, yeah, because he beats him for any reason. Obviously, he's going to beat him on this one.
Well, yeah, and I'm like, after a while, if you're beating your kids constantly, they're just not even going to listen to you because no matter what they do, they're going to get hit, right? So they're just going to go out and do what they want. Now,
being an exhibitionist or voyeur or whatever, that's one thing, but it seems like even peeping's not seen as a kink, really, is it? Isn't it kind of
they consider voyeurism or peeping like a kink, I guess.
Well, I mean, you got the little peep
it's
shows.
Obviously a criminal behavior.
Yeah.
But it's not really considered like a mental disorder because I was curious if there was how they classified peeping toms. Yeah.
Okay.
Danny had an interest in music. At 15, he received a guitar for Christmas. Which is strange because they didn't really celebrate holidays, but he was self-taught and began writing songs. He started working at Dairy Queen, but soon his grades dropped and was forced to quit. He started hunting and killing animals at this time too. Danny was arrested multiple times for underage drinking. Having witnessed his mother's suicide attempts, Danny used a razor to slit his wrists, and he wrote in lipstick on the mirror, "I tried, I just can't make it."
Oh my gosh, that's sad.
At Woodlawn High School, Danny did join the school band, and he did really well in history. That was his favorite class. but he dropped out of high school in 1971 when he was 17. He did earn a GED. Danny pressured James to sign so that he could enlist in the Navy. He needed his parents' permission and threatened that if he, didn't sign the papers for James to, if James didn't sign the paperwork for Danny, he was going to run away, and this time for good. But the Navy ended up rejecting Danny, so he joined the U.S. Air Force instead.
Oh. Didn't pass the aptitude test, you reckon?
Yeah, that was the problem, is he didn't score very well on the Navy's, I guess at that time they weren't really doing ASVABs, but whatever the test was, he didn't score very well. His first duty station was Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, where he trained as a security police officer. He was transferred to Florida at Homestead Air Force Base. While in the Air Force, Danny was introduced to psychedelics.
Yeah, baby, yeah.
He tripped on acid over 100 times and used many other recreational drugs, from cocaine to marijuana, pills.
That's a good bit of tripping on acid there, bud.
No, that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's probably not good for your brain.
No.
Violating military policy on drugs, Danny was placed in the brig for drug possession and disobeying orders. He was then given an other than honorable discharge after a military psychiatrist diagnosed him with a personality disorder. It was around this time, at age 18, that Danny had sex for the first time. However, he was high on LSD, and the next morning, he regretted the decision. So maybe Danny's a little bit more sentimental than we would give him credit for.
Oh, regretted having
Lost his virginity while he was fucked up on drugs.
Well, yeah. That's a reasonable thought.
Right. Well, upon being kicked out of the military, Danny moved back to Louisiana and into his grandfather's house. He found religion. Danny started going to a Pentecostal church where he was baptized. He became very involved in church activities. And during this time, he would have been around 19, he met a girl or a woman named Omatha Halko. He thought that she was a gift from God.
Well, that's an interesting name.
I'm sorry, I've typed here Omaha, but her real name is Omatha. So Omatha got pregnant with their daughter, so Danny married her in 1974. Daughter Kylie Danielle was born in 1975, and Danny felt the pressure of fatherhood. He was working 2 jobs to support his young family. Omatha soon learned that her new husband was not the God-fearing man she'd fallen in love with. Soon enough, Danny returned to his old ways. He was drinking, smoking pot, and would often disappear for days or even weeks at a time. His behavior was erratic. Danny was moody, and at one point, even threatened to kill his wife. She was afraid of him. A police officer caught Danny peeping into windows around this time. He was returned home to his wife, which, of course, this didn't make her happy.
Well, he's like, I found your husband peeking in people's windows, and he took him home to the wife?
Yeah,
Ooh.
She's I'm not going to say slowly, she's pretty quickly realizing that she's gotten herself into a bad situation with this guy. He is not at all the man she thought she knew. So he begins telling her that he's seeing UFOs, ghosts, demons, and Jesus.
That's a lot.
Danny quit going to work. At this time, Omatha reaches out to James and Claudia for help. When James came to their house to talk some sense into Danny, the man ended up holding a knife to his son's throat.
Yeah, well, she probably has no idea that his dad's freaking insane either, right?
No.
I mean, yeah, so you call expecting, hey, can you help? Do you know what we can do to help him feel better? And then his dad shows up and is just acting crazier than he is.
Well, I'm just calling him and we need, I need you to help me. He's not going to work. We've got bills. We have a baby.
Yeah, and he comes
Can
over.
you come over and talk to him? And then this is what happens.
That's not cool.
It was in 1977 when Omatha finally had enough of Danny's bullshit. She announced her plans to leave him, but Danny did not take this rejection well. Omatha had been having an affair with an ex-boyfriend, and when Danny found out, he was furious. Dylan, he is furious.
Well, what do you expect, man? You're running off for days at a time. You're drinking. You're being an asshole to her. I mean, honestly. What would you expect?
He assaulted his wife, then pulled a gun on her. He then turned the gun on himself and threatened suicide. But this was the final straw. Omatha soon filed for separation, and they were granted a divorce about 6 months later. During this period, Danny committed his first rape, but it seems no charges were filed against him. This is just through, years of interviews and confessions that he admitted right after this divorce is when he decided to rape this woman.
Well, and I mean, why wouldn't you believe him, I guess, right?
Danny also was involved in a terrible car accident, which resulted in a woman's death. And this accident haunted Danny for years to come. Like, it was something he seemed like he just couldn't shake, which would be very troubling for anybody, I imagine. After the dissolution of his marriage, Danny tried to straighten up again. He met a 17-year-old girl named Mary Lynn who got him back into church, but Danny couldn't assimilate normally into society. He was soon committing crimes again. This time, Danny was involved in robberies. He would perform B&Es, and for some reason, he decided robbing grocery stores, particularly Winn-Dixie stores, was his jam.
Oh, okay.
Good old Winn-Dixie.
Good old Winn-Dixie. That's a good, solid grocery store.
They're all over the South.
Yep.
He robbed a store in Montgomery, Alabama for $800, then a Georgia store for about $200-something. He was arrested right after the Georgia robbery. During his interrogation, Danny admitted having robbed stores in 3 different states. He was tried and given 2 to 6 years in prison. I'm sorry, 2 6-year terms.
Oh.
I meant 2 to 6 year terms.
So he called 12 years.
Yeah. So he had to serve the 2 6-year terms back to back. Now, at first, Danny seemed distressed in prison, but after his mother's second visit, she described Danny as, seemingly like he was handling it well. He had put on weight and began bodybuilding.
Yeah, I could see a person like Danny kind of finding his way in prison.
He needs structure.
I think, and having grown up with such an overbearing father, as long as you do, I don't think prison's quite like a lot of people imagine, where you're just going to be, it's fairly normal. And if you just get in where you fit in, keep to yourself, just do your time. So I could see Danny operating okay in a situation like that.
During a chain gang work outing in 1979, Danny was cutting down trees. Well, he decided to escape, but it didn't work out in his favor. An officer fired a warning shot. Danny made it about 100 yards away before giving up. He was then sent to Reidsville prison for 6 months. And during his time at that facility, Danny was sexually assaulted by another inmate.
Oh, gosh. Well, I guess I was wrong, huh?
He also tried to kill a cat that roamed the prison grounds by throwing a rock at it. And this really angered a lot of these inmates, because this was kind of like the prison cat, and people enjoyed having the cat around. It was like the prison pet.
Well, yeah. I mean, these guys don't get much stimulus outside of talking to other prisoners. So I could see an animal owns a cat or a dog or even a little squirrel or something. I could see them being protective of it.
He was then taken to Alabama, where he was sentenced for his crimes there. Danny's lawyer in Alabama had him sent to a state mental facility for about 3 months. Doctors there concluded that Danny was sane and able to stand trial. He was sent back to prison for another 6 years. He attempted to run away from prison several more times. Each time he would get caught. Finally, he was locked up at the Staten Correctional Facility, and that's when he took up boxing. He earned a good reputation as a fighter and never lost. Once he was released from prison, he returned to Louisiana again, moving in with his parents, which, in my opinion, seems like the worst thing he could do.
Yeah, but I guess maybe he just didn't have any other options.
Of course, his relationship with James was strained. He bounced around with other relatives, but always eventually would move back to his parents' home. He'd go live with an aunt or an uncle or grandpa, but it just never quite worked out. Danny's sexual fantasies were still prevalent. He broke into a young woman's home after watching her from outside for several hours. When he tried to rape her, the young woman began crying. Danny felt a tinge of guilt. He decided against sexually assaulting her, instead asking for a cup of coffee. The pair sat together talking, which led to them singing songs together, and then they engaged in consensual sex. The woman actually drove him home afterwards.
Okay. That seems improbable. Do we just have his word on that account? So, it's interesting. Danny is trying to do these things, but he, like you said, he does kind of have a heart, he's almost has this sentimental side to him, like you said, like, feeling bad that he is, trying to force himself on this woman. So that's kind of interesting, right?
Well, in some ways, I think he might have some remorse, but
Well,
what he becomes is a fucking monster.
Right. So, at this point, he's still showing these signs. And I'm not saying you're not an okay guy if you try to rape a woman and then feel bad about it after the fact. You shouldn't, never try that in the first place, obviously. But it's interesting because most people, these types of people don't have any empathy or feel any guilt. They're full-blown sociopaths or whatever.
Well, and it does seem like Danny does have these feelings that he almost has like this compulsion, that he just can't control himself. But then afterwards, he does tend to kind of feel bad about what he's done.
Yeah, this lack of this impulse.
It's that impulse control,
yeah.
Right?
And I think that's what gets a lot of people in trouble in these situations. That's why they keep, maybe start out small or, like the peeping, or that's not as big a deal as, assault or whatever. But, they just keep on. I think where most normal people don't do that. Even if they have some weird, crazy thought, they don't act on it.
Fearing this woman would call police, Danny quickly left town, heading to a relative's home in California. After his 3-month visit there, he began hitchhiking around for about 6 or 7 months, eventually landing back in Florida, where he had some more family. After this, made his way back to California. So at this point, he's just kind of transient and like crisscrossing, hitchhiking, traveling around. While in the Golden State, he sustained a serious head and neck injury during a motorcycle accident.
Well, that's not good.
When he healed up enough, he hitchhiked to Boulder, Colorado, and then South Dakota, eventually ending up in Georgia. When he got to Georgia, he robbed a Kroger grocery store for less than $300. He had stolen a car, too, and police caught up with him the very next day. He was a criminal, but not a good one.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's not a very good criminal.
He pled guilty in the Kroger robbery, getting another jail sentence of 4 years. He escaped again, this time by swimming away in a river, but he was caught and returned to prison.
He never gets away.
No, not for very long. Danny was 32 years old when he was released from prison for the 3rd time. A condition of his release was that Danny agreed to return to his hometown in Louisiana. With a lengthy rap sheet and a jail record, imaginably, Danny had a difficult time finding work. Nobody wanted to hire this guy. When he did land a job in a restaurant, he missed several days in a row, and as a result, he was terminated. Danny was outraged. He threatened to kill the cook, the manager. Mad as hell.
You didn't come to work, dude. What'd you expect?
Well, it was around this time the bodies of his first murder victims were discovered on November 4th of 1989.
Oh, my God.
Julie Grissom, age 24, her father Tom, and her 8-year-old nephew Sean were attacked in their home while preparing dinner. Tom was 55, divorced, and a supervisor at AT&T. He lived on Beth Lane in Shrevesport's Southern Hills neighborhood. People liked Tom. He was quiet, polite, friendly, a very respectable citizen. He had battled throat cancer for years, but was finally on the mend. And Tom was nearing retirement, something he had been looking forward to at the time. His daughter Julie, a petite brunette, was a college student on the verge of graduating at LSU Shreveport. She was studying marketing. She had a part-time job at Dillard's. And this particular weekend was Sean's birthday. So 8-year-old Sean having a birthday. He was spending it visiting his grandfather and young aunt. So around 8:30 a.m. on Monday, November the 6th, 1989, Sean was supposed to return home, but he never did. Now, his mother made multiple phone calls to Tom's house, but no one answered. She became worried, as most mothers would, when she realized that her son had not shown up at school that day. He went to, Turner Elementary School. So she's, freaking out. She calls police. They are reaching out to neighbors around Tom's residence asking, like, do you think they're there? Could the door be unlocked? So 3 neighbors, which I thought was weird that the police called the neighbors instead of going there. But,
that's very strange.
Yeah, okay, I don't know why, but that was the detail. So 3 people who live nearby went to Tom's house, to the Grissom house, to find the garage door open. Inside, the lights were on in this 3-bedroom house. So they're just like casually walking through when they find the first body. Tom was slumped against a door blocking the entrance that went into like the utility room off the garage. He had stab wounds in the back and chest. Tom had been grilling steaks in the backyard at some point. So it seemed like he was out grilling steaks and like came in the house and got attacked. Is what had happened. Was Sean was in the family room lying face down. A stab wound in his back was so deep it exited out of this young boy's chest.
Oh, my God.
Police determined the child had been watching TV when he was attacked. Julie was in her bedroom, partially nude, hanging halfway off the bed. She had 3 stab wounds to the back. Someone had tried to clean her body with vinegar. Now, Julie had plans to attend a wedding that very evening. Her dress was hanging in the room. Like, she was trying to get ready to go out, have a good time at this wedding. The autopsy revealed the family had been massacred sometime around 6 p.m. on Saturday night, 2 days before the bodies were discovered. There were no signs of forced entry, no ransacking, nothing to indicate robbery had been a motive. There were signs of a small struggle, but overall the crime scene was described as neat.
So his willingness to attack everyone there is kind of scary to me.
Very.
You know, didn't Dennis Rader do that on
Yeah.
multiple occasions? There was not just the woman victim, but like
Well,
an entire
know
family.
I think it was the Ortega family,
Yes.
I believe. He
Oh, my
killed.
God.
I think they were the Ortegas. I don't know why that name's popping in my brain. It's probably not the right name. But there was a whole family, and it didn't go like he expected.
No, I think that was maybe early on in his
I
killings.
think it was the first. I think
Yeah.
it might have been the first murder.
It's just horrible.
And but he just decided, oh well, fuck it, and killed the whole family.
That torture, the surviving members seeing their family members brutalized, killed. I mean, I just couldn't imagine anything much worse than that.
Police were following leads, but the neighborhood was gripped in fear. Though law enforcement didn't think there was a remaining threat in the area, they thought this was just like an individual, like this was sort of a singular incident.
Yeah, but I mean, you got 3 victims, male, female, child. I mean, it seems like you'd be a little bit seemingly random, like this, like someone broke in and just killed everybody. They didn't steal anything. They didn't take anything. The woman seemed to be obviously sexually assaulted. So I think you would raise a little bit of alarm, wouldn't
Well,
would you not?
I'm sure they were just trying to keep everyone calm.
Well, I mean, there's a public, try to keep the public calm because that typically helps the investigation.
Well, they're not going to get on there and be like, there's a killer on the loose. You guys are going to get fucked up. You better lock in windows and doors.
Screaming and flashing their flashlight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that wouldn't work either.
Though Danny had attempted to clean bodily fluids, investigators knew the perpetrator had type B blood. But other than that, there's really not much evidence left behind.
Wow.
At the time of the murders, Danny lived about 10 minutes away from the crime scene. The Grissom murders would go unsolved for a time. A few weeks after the Grissom murders, Danny broke into a house where he'd peeped on a woman before, but this time no one was home. But Danny made himself comfortable. He watched television, had a snack, and then stole some items.
That staying.
Becoming more brazen,
yes,
too.
Staying at the crime scene, having a bite, cleaning up. That's always struck me as very strange and very bold. And I think it says a lot about the person who's committing these types of crimes.
Yeah, it's like he wants to be all creeping around your house when you're not there.
Yeah, he's getting off on
weird.
just being there in your house. Yes, exactly.
Life at home with James was not easy. If Danny had been abused by his father as a child, the adult son would endure more. The pair fought constantly. In May of 1990, during a particularly vicious fight, Danny shot his father in the stomach and again in the forehead, though some reports say he shot off his father's ear. So I'm not exactly sure what happened.
Okay, so his Father's been shot.
Well, it's not good, whatever it was. Whatever this altercation with the shooting. I don't know if he lost his ear or whatever, but he's still shot in the fucking stomach and forehead, so
I got my ear. He just shot me in my forehead. It wasn't no big deal. I mean, it was a pretty good angle. It kind of glanced off my big old head on the front side, and it wasn't nothing but a flesh wound.
Now get this. The fight started when Danny put his foot on a bench in their kitchen to tie his shoe. When James sees him, he yells at him, and instead Danny asks, like, well, what are you going to do about it?
Uh-oh.
So James fetches a gun and starts firing shots at his son. Danny runs outside and retrieves a gun from a shed, and then he starts shooting back at his dad.
Oh, yeah? Well, I'll go get my gun, you son of a bitch.
Well, at that point, Danny had reached his limits. He then shows up with that same gun in hand, breaking into the home of a couple he'd recently befriended. And this is all in the same evening. This couple had met him. They'd invited him over. They'd been hanging out a little bit. They were kind of like friends, you know? He's attempting to rob the couple and explains he's in trouble. He's got to get out of town. They end up giving him $30 and a jacket. Danny leaves on foot and doesn't return.
Oh, and that's how he didn't hurt them any further?
No, I mean, they were trying to, like, calm him down. We're friends. What's going on? You don't have to do this. Just ask us for the money. We'll help you.
Wow.
What do you need? Like,
they were lucky.
They were kind of able to diffuse his temper. After leaving Shreveport, Danny travels through several states. He takes a bus to Kansas City, where he lives with some long-haired hippies for about a month. Now, that's how he described them.
Long-haired hippies.
Yeah, them long-haired freaky people. In June of 1990, he robs 2 Kansas City grocery stores and a Taco Bell. It's during this time he also breaks into the home of Michael Kennedy Jr., a deceased man, and steals this guy's ID card and a .22 handgun.
Okay.
A few days later, he is robbing Westwood United Superstore in Kansas City. So bizarre. He tells the cashiers to please pray for me during the robbery.
Yeah.
And he manages to get away with $1,600.
Well, if I did pray, I'd be like, I ain't praying for you. You just robbed me. This is the most ungodly thing I've seen all week.
In a brazen display, he returns to that same store again on June 30th and robs them of $2,000 for a second time.
Okay.
He heads by bus to Boulder, Colorado, where he attempts to rape a blonde woman who happens to be on a mountain climbing trip. He viciously beats the woman, but lets her go. He robs a convenience store in Colorado before making his way back to Kansas City by hitchhiking. It is around this time that Danny smokes cocaine for the first time. So I guess he's kind of doing that on and off.
Just
moving forward.
So what time is this? Early 80s?
This would have been 90, I believe.
Okay, so he's full on probably crack.
Yeah. He makes collect calls to Shreveport, tells his mother he's been hiding in the woods to evade police because he robbed these stores.
I'm just checking in, Mama. I'm on the run.
I'm coming home.
I'm a bit of an outlaw if you ain't heard the news, but I was just checking on you and Daddy. I hate that son of a bitch. And if you guys need anything, I'm gotta go rob. I gotta go right now, Mama.
Well, if you need anything, you better ask my brother Kevin, because I'm not reliable.
I'm not reliable. I might be dead. I might be in jail. But when I rob that next store, I'm gonna get you something pretty.
Then
okay,
he
Mama?
gets off the phone and he starts singing that he's the only hell his mama ever raised.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Very sentimental. Danny makes his way back to Florida, where he will begin transitioning his life under a fake identity, that of Michael Kennedy Jr., the fake ID he has stolen. He checks into a local Tallahassee motel, a Travelodge on West Tennessee Street, using the name for the first time. He buys a K-bar knife at the Army-Navy store. On July 22nd, he takes a bus to Sarasota. He makes a friend, and they start kind of hitting up the bars, a few restaurants, and strip clubs together. Danny even meets a woman who works at the local motel in Sarasota where he's staying, and the two begin casually dating. But when the money is all gone, he moves to a cheaper motel for a few days and then disappears again. So just this very transient lifestyle.
Yeah, he just goes along, when he needs money or funds. He's not afraid to rob anybody in sight. He's not afraid to assault people privately. So, yeah, he's kind of out of control.
And because we have these periods of, he's being transient. We don't exactly know what he's doing kind of between cities. Like, we have some dates of he was here, he was there, but, you know, in the weeks kind of between, we are not sure what he was doing. It is on August 18th that he steps off a bus in Gainesville. He is still using the name Michael Kennedy, checks into a motel on 13th Street. He uses cash to rent the room. For several days, he scopes out the area and marvels at the number of attractive young women around town. But this is a college town. But he's just, like, beside himself. There's this pretty girls from Miles, Dylan.
Yeah. So there he is in the midst of all these young collegiate women.
Collegiate?
Collegiate. No, it's a CK on the end of it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the way I say it.
All right.
These collegiates. And so I guess he can probably hardly control himself because he does lack this impulse control, and he's certainly not afraid to attack someone. So I can only imagine what's going through his mind.
I just imagine him like, and this is just my goofy brain, is like the David Lee Roth video, Just a Gigolo, and he's like walking down the streets, and he's like, Scooby-Dooby bop bop, ooh, she's pretty, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna rape that one.
Maybe. No, I'm just thinking of him just being like, you know, I'm just a gigolo.
Well, yeah,
and down in Gainesville, Skid Row.
I'm not gonna. I always remember he's a rapist though, because David Lee Roth is makes me feel good.
Yeah, I know.
Thinking about David Lee Roth.
Well, no, but I'm just thinking in his brain. He's like, oh, look at all the hot girls.
Yeah, I know.
And like, he's grody, but like, he probably thinks he's like a stud.
It doesn't matter.
Because let's face it, gross dudes, it doesn't matter. They typically have good self-esteem.
In his mind, he can hook up with any of these women because he doesn't need consent.
Well, there's that. Thanks for pointing that out, Dylan.
Yeah.
You make a great point.
Well, that's how rapists think. And I hate rapists, by the way. I'm not defending rapists.
In the early morning hours of Friday, August 24th, Rolling broke into the apartment of college student 17-year-old freshman Sonia Larson and Christina Powell. Powell happened to be asleep on the downstairs sofa. Oh, this freaks me out. Danny stood over her for a few minutes, like watching her sleep. Ugh. But decided to make his way upstairs first. He found Larson sleeping in her bed. He taped her mouth shut, then stabbed her to death with the K-bar. She fought for her life against Danny, but couldn't fend off his attack. He then went downstairs to tape Powell's mouth shut. He bound her wrists together and cut off her clothes with a knife. Danny then sexually assaulted the woman before stabbing her in the back 5 times. He returned to Sonia's body and raped it again. So he's also a necrophile.
Oh my God. How brutal.
Yeah. He then posed the 2 women in sexually suggestive poses. He showered, left the apartment. Danny tossed the evidence into a dumpster. He then rode away on his bike. He would say he found one of the girl's nipples in his bag, and it made him feel ill.
Okay. Well, that means you had to have cut it off, right?
Well, that statement about it like made him feel ill is kind of why I think that it's like he has no self-control and he does these things, but then later when he realizes maybe what he's done, he's like, ooh, like I shouldn't have done that, or...
Well, you know, I mean,
I don't know.
That doesn't win you any points really with me, but
well, it doesn't.
I'm glad.
But you were pointing out earlier that he seemed to have some guilt.
No, I'm not saying you were being sympathetic to him, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing because maybe you just feel really shitty and horrible about the heinous thing that you just did, but you certainly not to the degree you A, never do it again, or B, turn yourself in to the law enforcement, say, I don't know what happened, I don't know what I was doing, or accept any kind of responsibility for this terrible, terrible things you're doing to people.
No, this guy's a fucking horrible person. A day later, Saturday, August 25th, Danny broke into the apartment of 18-year-old Krista Hoyt. He used a screwdriver to open a sliding glass door, like popping it open. The student wasn't home yet, so he waited in the living room. It was around 11 a.m. when she walked back into the apartment. A surprise attack, Danny crept up behind her, placing the woman in a chokehold. He then duct taped her wrists and mouth. Danny dragged the young woman to the bedroom where he cut off her clothes with a knife and then raped her. Afterwards, he forced her to roll onto her stomach, where he proceeded to stab her repeatedly. He then flipped her over, slicing from her breastbone down to the pubic area.
That's interesting.
Just like splitting her open.
I just don't know. He likes to stab them in the back. It's almost like he can't look at them while he's doing it.
No, it definitely is. It seems like that's the case.
Yeah.
Afterwards, Danny left the crime scene. Now at this point, he has been camping in some woods nearby because he's run out of money, can't afford a motel anymore. He arrives back at his campsite and realizes he didn't have his wallet. So he had to go back to her apartment where earlier, he'd just murdered this woman. He goes inside looking for his wallet and decides he's just going to decapitate her now.
God.
It gets worse. He then sits her body upright on the bed, in a sitting position, places her head across the room on a shelf.
Looking back at her own body.
Yeah.
Oh, that's disturbing.
He had also removed the young woman's nipples, which he left on the bed beside her body. Now, later he would say he did this all for shock value. That he wanted whoever found her to just be like...
What the fuck?
Yeah.
Well, I think that worked. I mean, there's no... Well, finding these women dead, period. Stabbed, brutalized, murdered. But, I mean, this is a whole nother...
The depravity.
This is a whole nother level.
This.
And taking this time, not... maybe not thinking about or not caring. That it's almost like he, in a way, seems like he doesn't care if he gets caught. I mean, I don't know. But going back and spending all that time, even more time there, and just deciding to kind of, hang out, it's weird.
By now, news of the Gainesville Ripper, as he was being called, was spreading across the city. It was attracting widespread media attention. College students were living in fear, young women were changing up their routines, sleeping in groups of friends, and some even withdrew enrollment from the university.
Yeah, anytime something like this.
Their parents would be like, get your ass home.
Gun sales likely went up. Parents, counseling their children every day about security.
Because this is August, so the semester's just started.
Right.
And I can imagine if I sent my children off to college and this happened within the first week of school, that there was a madman on the loose, terror, I would be like, get your ass home.
Right. And that's no surprise right there.
College can wait.
Yeah, we can figure that out later, but you need to get away from that area right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely understand. I would not want to stay there. August 27th, Danny Rawling finds himself once again breaking into an apartment sliding glass door with a screwdriver. Inside the apartment, a guy named Manny Taboda was asleep. Danny found him in the bedroom. Now, there were roommates that lived here, right? But the pair, Danny and Manny, they had a struggle before Danny managed to overpower him, and then he killed him. His roommate, a girl named Tracy, she hears the noises. Her name is Tracy Paulez. She hears the noises coming from Manny's room and is like, what the hell is my roommate doing? This doesn't sound right. So she gets up to investigate. She sees Danny, and she runs to her own room and tries to barricade the door. But Danny was able to break through the door. He ties her up, typical. It's the same MO. He ties up her wrists, duct tapes her mouth. And like the previous attacks on the female victims before, Danny brutally rapes the young woman. He then forces her to turn over and stabs her 3 times in the back. He posed her body, but left Manny's where it lay.
So strange.
The female victims were all petite brunettes with brown eyes, and some say they bore a resemblance to Danny's mother, Claudia. So he definitely has a type. He likes petite brunettes. Let's talk a minute about this K-bar that he is using to attack these poor people with. It was designed for the U.S. Marine Corps and got its name from a fur trapper who used it to kill a bear. And that's where the K-bar comes from. They drop the killa and it's K-bar, but it was kill a bear. I guess the way the guys...
bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
So that's where it got its name. It was a knife that caused maximum damage to human beings. So these, again, these were fucking brutal murders.
So this knife is made to kill a human, basically.
Yeah.
The design of the blade.
Some of the stab wounds were 7, 8 inches deep.
Yeah, it has a pretty good
wide.
length.
It's just...
Has a specific design. I can picture it in my head, but a specific design to the blade. and it's made for stabbing people, and that's obviously what he's using it for.
Yeah, it was made. I mean, it was made before World War II, for like hunters and stuff. But it was like after this fur trapper's like, hey, I killed a bear with it. They started designing it for the military, and it is specifically designed with the intent to kill. And it was used during World War II, which we all know was a very bloody war. A lot of hand-to-hand combat, like Normandy, and yeah,
Very bloody. If you look at the numbers of people killed in World War One to World War II, it is exponentially larger. The machine gun and all these weapons of death were rolled out, but that kill a lot of people quickly. So yeah, it's pretty horrible.
And if you want, and this is a side note, if you want to watch a very good miniseries that sort of depicts like the reality of World War II, like how horrible it was, Band of Brothers.
Yes, Band of Brothers does an amazing job of. We actually rewatched it.
I watch that miniseries like every couple of years.
Years since I've
really
seen
like
it, and it really has it really conveys the intensity of the type of warfare. I believe, specifically when they're there trapped in the forest.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty amazing. You have to give that a whirl.
Right. So when you consider the kind of hand-to-hand combat that was going on like during this war, I mean, this knife was what it's designed for. So I just kind of wanted to point that out, that not only is he stabbing these people, but he's using a very brutal weapon that was designed for this purpose.
Yeah, it's like the hollow point bullet of knives.
Law enforcement had few leads in the murders. Now, a few suspects did emerge. A task force was created among police agencies in Gainesville. The memory of Ted Bundy's murderous rampage was still in the forefront of everyone's minds in the area. This was not the first time they'd had a serial killer there.
Oh, wow. I forgot that. Yes. That's crazy. So, there's been a maniac on the loose before in this area, right?
Yeah, Ted Bundy, didn't he attack a sorority?
Or was it the nurses? Is that...
That was Richard Speck.
Oh, okay. Well, was it Bundy that kind of tried to not do it, and then he lost his shit and took a stick of firewood and basically clubbed everybody in the house in the head, beat them to death?
Well, you're asking me a question I don't know.
I think that might have been the students, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking that it was like that Bundy attacked like a sorority house.
Yeah, and he didn't even rape or nothing. He just basically murdered everyone in the house. Yeah, because that's what happened.
It was a sorority house.
Right.
It was a 3 a.m. frenzied attack on the Chi Omega house, January 14th, 1978. And is still considered, this was at FSU, so this actually was in Tallahassee, but,
That's the
Florida
area.
College, same area. He severely beat 4 women, killed 2 of them at the sorority house. So, yeah, they're still, this is not the first time we have had this type of thing. This serial killer showing up, college campus, terrorizing. One of those suspects was a man named Edward Humphrey. Now, he was an 18-year-old college freshman from Indianapolis who had a history of strange behavior, including an attack on his grandmother. Humphrey was also a knife collector. Authorities plastered his photograph across the news media by Labor Day. Now, his life was examined at length. Searches of his home and car were commenced. A large knife was found hidden behind the hot water heater of his apartment, along with a map showing a pond marked with X's.
That's not weird at all. That's where I keep my knife.
He was fingerprinted, and they took hair and blood samples. During an August 30th interview, he made some odd statements to law enforcement. However, a true crime author, Ann Rule, who had written extensively about Ted Bundy and interviewed Bundy while he was in prison, she was asked by the media if she thought Humphrey was the killer, and she said no. She said he was too young. She didn't believe he was sophisticated enough to be a serial killer. Humphrey was just another young man with undiagnosed mental illness who had a creative imagination, and he was never officially charged in the case. So we'll get back. I think we talk a little bit more about him here in a few minutes. So as his money is running out, like I mentioned before, Danny has set up this camp in this wooded area near 34th Street. He has a tent, and it's about 250 yards from the road, but it's hidden by woods. So you probably wouldn't know, if you were sitting in traffic or something, that there was a guy camping in the woods over here. But it's this is a busy area.
Right.
So he's just like, can easily access stuff, but he's kind of hidden away.
Yeah, and then disappear off in these little thicket.
Yeah, so he's like a
woods.
fucking predator hiding out. He watches the film Exorcist 3 around this time, and the plot of the movie features a demon named Gemini, and that happens to be Danny's astrological sign. So remember that, because that comes into play later. So later this evening, after he's watched The Exorcist, he's caught by a security guard peeping into an apartment. It is August 27th, which is like a day later, that Danny enters into the First Union Bank on Archer Road, and he robs the place. He's wearing a ski mask, and he's about 50 feet away from the bank. As he's, leaving, a red dye packet explodes inside his duffel bag, and it causes like all this red smoke to billow out of the top of the bag and just creates a fucking mess.
Nice. I got a dye pack in on his ass.
Oh, yeah. He runs through a Dollar General store parking lot where witnesses see him removing the ski mask. The following morning around 1 a.m., a police officer spots a black and white man walking near 34th Street into this wooded area, and they're still looking for a robbery suspect. So the officer calls for backup and then follows these men into the woods on foot. When the cop orders them to stop, the white man sprints deep into the woods, but the black man does stop and speak to the officer. He explains that he'd met this guy Mike, this white guy, earlier at Taco Bell, and Mike had offered him $10 to give him a ride across town. Mike lived at a campsite in the woods where he had some money on hand and was saving up to go to Kansas City. This is like what the gentleman's telling the cop. So a canine is brought in when they bring back up, and it tracks Mike's scent to this camp about 300 feet away in the woods from where the officer initially stopped them. Police find a large amount of dye-stained money inside a tent there, so they know this is the guy who robbed the bank.
Yeah, I bet they're like, hell yeah, we got him now, boys.
The officers also find a handgun, some jewelry, a ski mask, gloves, and a cassette player. Because Danny really likes to listen to Wham.
Ooh.
I'm just kidding, he doesn't. I don't know what he listens to.
Oh, man, I was
He's like, wake me up before I go rob a bank and rape and rob and kill.
Yeah,
right?
That's the remix. I never heard that
Yeah,
one.
he just gets all jazzed up.
On his little Walkman.
Well, I did think
that
that's kind of funny. They found a little cassette player. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Later, assistants from the FBI will determine the gun had belonged to a man named Robert Ford, who would say he sold it to a drifter he'd met named Michael.
Nice. The same Michael. Who sells a drifter a gun, bro?
I would sell a drifter a gun.
Would you?
Sure. Why not?
I mean, I guess if
I'm not going to sell them my gun, but if I had like somebody else's gun, I would sell it to them.
I guess if you want the gun to go away, that'd be a
If
good
there was
way
somebody I didn't like, I would sell the gun to the drifter and like try to frame that person for murder.
Like here.
It's like a really salacious made-for-TV movie.
You want a hell of a deal on a gun? All right, we've done that deal. You like peeping? I can tell. Look at that window over there with the blinds partially open. Boom. They're on top of your neighbors, killing them.
Oh, I like peeping. An engineering student at the University of Florida named Christopher Osborne returns home from school on August 30th to find his apartment door unlocked and ajar. Someone had broken in by removing a screen from a bedroom window. The perpetrator had made himself at home by eating some oatmeal, watching a Playboy video, and stealing Osborne's car, a 1978 Buick Regal. Danny then shows up in Tampa, where he robs a Save and Pack grocery store, leaving with about $3,000. However, two deputies step in front of him as he's trying to get away and draw guns. Danny is only able to put the car in reverse, but gets wedged in this alley. He pulls a gun on a female deputy, telling her, quote, "I don't want to shoot you," and a short standoff begins. But then Danny yanks the car into gear and takes off driving through the deputies, though they're firing shots at him. So in total, 19 shots are fired, 17 hit the car.
Oh, them cops can shoot.
Not one of the bullets hit Danny. A few blocks away, police find the car smoking from under the hood, riddled with bullet holes. He flees the scene on foot, then runs to a house where he breaks in by removing the sliding glass door. This is just like his MO, is like breaking into the sliding glass door. He calls his mother and ex-girlfriend Collect from this residence. which is pretty stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's leaving a trail.
No. It is Labor Day weekend at this point, so he finds another empty house but doesn't find anything of value. Instead, he steals a 10-speed bike from someone, pedals away. He ends up spending the night at a construction site.
So that's the thing with Danny. He'll just stay anywhere.
He just don't give a fuck.
He just doesn't care.
He's not give a fuck. A few days later, Danny meets a woman named Margaret Sanders at a park. She's like a freelance artist, and she's there doing drawings. Drawings. She offers him a place to spend the night after they have some conversation. She even draws him a map the next day so he can come back for another night.
I bet it's the best map ever.
He then breaks into an apartment owned by Ray and Patricia Rio. The Rios, along with their 16-year-old son, are asleep when Danny pries open the door with a screwdriver. He eats a banana, steals 2 watches, then takes the keys to their 1983 Ford Mustang. That same day, he strolls into a Winn-Dixie grocery store, flashing a .38 revolver, demanding money. But he doesn't get far with the $2,000 booty before officers are swarming the area. This is in Ocala, Florida. And it happens to be a training day, Dylan, so they had double, the regular number of cops available.
Nice.
He leads police on a high-speed chase, then crashes the car at an intersection. Danny jumps out of the wreckage and hauls ass across a parking lot. So after a foot chase, Danny Rawling is finally apprehended. And he tells the cops, quote, "Boy, you guys are good."
I bet there's some rookie like, man, this training's realistic as hell. How do you guys do that?
During an interrogation with the Ocala Police Department, Danny freely admits to the robbery. Now, years later, Danny will address a law enforcement class from prison at an FBI training academy in Quantico. And he will say, quote, "Going to Ocala was the worst thing I could have done." That's the worst thing you could have done, Danny? You dumbass.
Yeah, that's not the worst thing you've done.
Back in Gainesville, the Mortar Board Honor Society... the Mortar Board. That's probably what it is. The Mortar Board.
The Mortar Board.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. It's late.
Nice.
They created a memorial for the 5 slain students on September the 20th. 5 live oak trees were planted on the University of Florida campus near Smathers Library in memoriam of these students. The Miami Herald's October 20th edition featured a headline, "Louisiana case is similar to killings in Gainesville." Now, the article indicated that the task force in Florida had renewed interest in a triple homicide in Shreveport of the Grissom family. There were several similarities, from the victims being young, pretty brunettes to the use of tape and a knife murder weapon. Some of the Gainesville police played down this connection, like, there's a lot of murders like this that take place.
Yeah, but I mean, you got the duct tape, the stabbed in the back, likely. Weapon is a knife. I mean,
Danny's from Shreveport.
I think
on, guys.
there's enough similarities that it could be discussed.
Well, DNA testing on blood and hair samples had proved that the gentleman Humphrey, the suspect, who had been held on those charges for assaulting his grandmother, was not the Gainesville killer. There was no match. Humphrey was tried for that assault and sentenced to a mental institution, and then he would get probation upon release. I believe he got 22 months in a mental hospital. Now, his grandmother expressed that she wished the police had never been called because she felt it was blown out of proportion. But he was no longer a Ripper suspect. And I actually saw a follow-up article about Humphrey. He did manage to go back some years later and finish his degree. Had a really high GPA, and said, once he had gotten himself medicated because he was suffering from some mental illness, once he got himself medicated and got the proper help, he's been a great productive citizen.
So in a weird way, getting caught up in this investigation in a way was a good thing for him.
Possibly.
Yeah, I mean it.
Yeah. Well,
he got
his
treatment.
life is okay now.
Right.
He's no longer known as the suspect.
Well, I won't say a good thing.
He graduated from college, and then everything seemed better.
Yeah, he certainly benefited from kind of being forced into treatment, if you will.
By Thanksgiving, the community was growing increasingly frustrated with the slow progress of this task force. Victims' families struggled to balance their feelings of grief and anger. Law enforcement didn't want to put a timeline on solving the case. Serial killer cases, as we know, are time consuming. They're labor intensive and costly. I mean, it's not like television where, on CSI, there's a perpetrator caught in like 30 minutes.
Oh, they're like, give me all the results from the forensics in 5 minutes now. They just name off all this shit that would take like a year and a half to get back.
DNA and all that. Serial killer cases often go unsolved for decades. Not to mention, this was still kind of the early days of DNA forensics. So they didn't have the same technology available that they do today, which can slow things up a bit. And you got to consider, Dylan, transients like Danny Rawling and Sam Little, they're hard to track.
They're the hardest to track. There's no kind of pattern. There's not a good, you can't go to one neighborhood and ask people questions. Yeah, so it's almost impossible to keep track of someone who moves around like this.
And this killer didn't leave a lot to work with. It was obvious the murderer was methodical and had, taken some time to plan the attacks. He knew to clean up after himself. I mean, if you have no evidence as a detective, you're left running down all leads and trying to develop new ideas. You're just in a bind. With the Ted Bundy case, Gainesville law enforcement was able to arrest him within 4 weeks, but they weren't sure they were going to have the same success with this case. Now, a psychologist named John Philpin prepared a profile of the killer, which showed the suspect's criminal acts had escalated over time. He speculated the killer was a person who had done some, quote, creepy crawly work, like breaking and entering homes, where he likely just walked around without taking anything. He would be a peeping Tom or voyeur who liked watching women in their homes. Invading privacy and coming in from the outside was part of this particular fantasy for him.
Oh my God, this guy's nailing it.
He likely had a juvenile record or had been busted for this type of offense, like peeping. The accuracy of this man's conclusion, pretty spot on.
Yeah, I would say Danny's done all those things, including the, when he first broke into homes and just kind of creeping around and looking around and leaving without, anyone knowing he was there. I bet you $100 he did that.
While police are scrambling to find their killer, Danny is in jail awaiting trial for that armed robbery charge. He attempts escaping by throwing a toilet through a window.
Why not? That's so effective. Honestly, anytime a toilet goes through the window, you can typically go right out that window.
I know. I'm like, what is this? Like a fucking Looney Tunes cartoon? Like,
what is
here comes the toilet out the window.
Is he a strong man? He just rips the toilet off the floor?
Right?
Shit.
Well, it's plexiglass, so it doesn't break.
Oh, they're never going to notice that I ripped the toilet off and threw it at the window.
Well, the jail was already aware of Danny's history of escaping custody, so he was being checked on like every 15 minutes. At this time, his attorney recommends he get a mental health evaluation. Danny's grandmother wrote a letter on his behalf to the judge, stating that his mood changes like the clouds in the sky. But as we know, judges don't usually take this kind of thing into consideration. Pleas from the family. After reviewing Danny's habitual criminal history, he's sentenced to life in prison.
Oh, this judge was...
Because he's like a habitual felon.
Yeah.
And Florida has like that 3 strikes. Don't they have a 3 strikes law or something?
Well, they don't mess around in Florida,
Well,
bud.
they don't.
It's like Texas. You play around if you want.
So while he's in jail, Danny has been following the Gainesville Ripper news with an almost religious fervor. He tells other inmates with confidence that police are never going to catch this killer.
Oh, okay, that's weird.
I know. Shreveport law enforcement has contact with the Gainesville task force, and the Louisiana investigators believe the suspect is a drifter who's responsible for the 1989 Grissom family murders, and that he may be in custody in Florida. So a woman named Cindy Dobbin, who had met Danny 15 years earlier, is the one who actually called the tip in to the Shreveport police. After this tip, investigators noted the similarities in the murders in both states. And I hadn't mentioned before, but Julie Grissom was cleaned by the assailant, and the victim is in Florida, had also been like crudely douched with dish liquid after the murders, because Julie had been cleaned with vinegar, which I did mention. But he had also taken the time to try to clean the Florida victims with dish liquid, like trying to insert it, like, in their vagina, thinking, I guess, that the dish liquid would kill the sperm. I don't know. This guy's a moron. The serial killer had made 2 mistakes despite efforts to clean the crime scenes. One is that he left behind tool marks on the doors that he had entered, and he failed to destroy all traces of semen left at crime scenes. He left semen in a pair of underwear and on a paper towel at the first crime scene. Krista Hoyt had seminal fluids left behind in her vagina, and Tracy Paulez had semen in her rectum. They needed to obtain blood and hair samples from this new suspect, Danny Rolling.
Well, yeah, anytime someone like that, I'm glad that he couldn't completely eradicate the evidence because he's a piece of shit.
Luck was what Gainesville detectives working the case needed, and that good luck charm would come on January 22nd of 1991. County jail officials contacted the task force to say their suspect in custody, Danny Rolling, the drifter who might be linked to murders in Louisiana, had a tooth pulled. Not counting on the DNA to match, investigators knew even if it did, this new science might be hard to explain to a jury. I mean, if it went to trial, the jury might not understand the significance of DNA analysis. The detectives knew they needed to find some other evidence too, or at least keep trying to find more to connect this man.
Yeah, this was an issue early on with not just forensics, but especially DNA for some reason. People just didn't understand it. Therefore, they didn't even consider it in their judgments. So, yeah, I mean, we take it for granted nowadays. Everyone's like, well, if there's not DNA, they're like, well, I don't know. I need the DNA evidence. But, yeah, it was that was part of the uphill battle, not just getting the sample or, coming to a scientific conclusion, but also convincing the jury. When you start throwing numbers like quadrillion and billion around, people are just like, oh, God, I don't understand it. So, yeah, it was a big deal early on.
Days later, someone leaked the information to the press. The Gainesville Sun ran a headline about a new suspect already being held at the county jail, and it named Danny. As news of his status, being the prime suspect, was aired, people back in Shreveport had mixed opinions. Most remembered Danny Rolling as a loner. He had exhibited odd behaviors over the years, like jogging down the street dressed like Rambo, as one neighbor recalled. Saying that he was almost childlike and definitely strange. Others told how Rolling seemed to relate to children more than adults. He was often seen playing guitar and singing songs to the kids. He would also let kids play on his weight bench. The neighborhood kids loved him, but this attention often left a weird impression on parents and adults. And his parents were shocked. His father, James, said his son was disturbed, but not capable of the gruesome murders. And finally, the first suspect, Humphrey, his family expressed sympathy for the Rolling family, as the media attacks had ruined their lives. And they felt bad that this was happening to another family.
Wow. That's interesting.
Friends turned their back on these people, like not wanting to be associated with a potential murder. Employers didn't want to associate with the family of someone who's potentially guilty.
Well, I mean, these are some gruesome...
the Humphrey family's like, you've already tried and convicted, my son, my relative Humphrey, in the court of public opinion, and he's completely innocent. He didn't do this. And now you're doing it to this other guy who hasn't even been tried yet.
Yeah. And these are particularly gruesome crimes. And, I don't know. I mean, if I was friendly with the family, I would it would probably affect my relationship with that family, wouldn't you say?
Well, I don't know. I guess I would view it as like,
well, I mean,
that's not you. That's not my friend. That's not you who did it personally.
Well, I guess it depends on how they're reacting to the situation. And I think everyone tends to, not my kid could never do this, which is a natural reaction. But as the evidence mounts and comes out, some people continue that thought, can't admit it to themselves. But if they were like, oh, my God, I think my son might have did this, I might support them that way. But if they were just deny, ignore all evidence, then I don't think I could be cool with that.
DNA results came back from the lab in March of 1991. The semen recovered from the Krista Hoyt crime scene matched Rolling so closely, there was only 1 in 3 million chance it belonged to someone else. Fibers from the ski mask found at Rolling's campsite matched those found on a piece of duct tape from the Larson Powell apartment. The tool marks on the door matched a screwdriver belonging to Danny as well, which was found at the campsite. Further analysis would connect the screwdriver to 3 different crime scenes. They were able to recover receipts and security footage, like CCTV footage, which showed Danny had encountered the women, Ms. Larson and Ms. Powell, at a Walmart, and then at a convenience store near their apartment, which was very close to his campsite. So they actually have video footage of like him seeing these women in Walmart and like watching them, almost like stalking them.
Wow.
And then later at a convenience store, and he shows up there again. Yeah.
So either he's just happened to come across them, which is what got his attention in the first place, or he's already following them around.
Well, I mean, he never admits that he had been stalking them from the start, but it seems like as much as Danny likes to peep and watch people, that he had his eyes on these two. Krista Hoyt had also been at that same convenience store. It was one of the last places she was seen before being murdered. After collecting evidence, including that DNA, Rawling was finally charged with the murders in November of 1991. He was brought to trial nearly 4 years later because his federal cases had to be resolved first.
My gosh, there's victims who need resolution.
Danny Rawling told investigators he wanted to be famous like Ted Bundy. This case had cost taxpayers nearly $4.7 million with 200 investigators and a follow-up on 6,500 leads.
Yeah, and sometimes I get the impression that when the authorities are reluctant to say the word serial killer or these murders may be connected, is sometimes because of cost.
It's a budget restraint.
A budget issue.
Sorry.
And I understand the public safety issue, which is you should always do your best to, handle the public in the best way. But when it seems like cost is the bigger reason that you're not doing this, that pisses me off. Because we got to come up with this money somehow. And you spend money on all kinds of things. And I think trying to get a monster off the street is a good reason to spend taxpayer money, a good way.
He was tried in March of 1992 for armed robbery in Ocala. He was given another life sentence. He began a relationship with a woman named Sandra London, who fancied herself a true crime author, and she's written a book about him.
Okay.
They start having like this really strange relationship. Danny also began talking about demons and the supernatural as if he was blaming these entities for the murders, even calling one of them Gemini, like the Exorcist 3 movie he had seen.
Oh, no.
Psychologists diagnosed Danny with borderline personality disorder and others, such as an antisocial, narcissistic, and hysterical personality disorder. His emotional and psychological development was aged at a child. Danny's brother Kevin was interviewed about their childhood. Now, he described Danny as being cruel but gentle. And Kevin definitely had blocked out a lot of the childhood, but he says that his childhood was not as bad as Danny's, right? But he said Danny was gentle but cruel.
That's a very strange description.
He said he would set fire to a turtle, but then hold a butterfly in his hands and just, spend moments just like in
amazed
awe
by
at
how
this
beautiful
this butterfly was, and would just be so gentle with this little delicate butterfly.
Oh my God, who's going to set the little turtle on fire?
I don't know. That made me sad.
He can't even run away.
Oh my God, little turtles are so cute. I watched a video earlier of like little baby sea turtles hatching on the beach and poking their little heads up out of the sand. They're like trying to oh my God, they're so cute.
Did he have to pour in a accelerant on it? Because the turtle just doesn't seem like it can burn.
I don't know, and I don't want to get into it because it upsets me.
Okay.
You're lucky I even mentioned that part. So Kevin also could imagine the brother he had grown up with was capable of murder. Many relatives viewed Danny as someone who couldn't hurt a flea. However, a borderline personality, according to his doctor, is someone who acted at two extremes. Like 98% of Danny's life, he was kind of seen as like a good guy, and the other 2%, he was just like a fucking madman, like Jekyll and Hyde. Which I think is a good way to describe Danny.
Yeah, definitely.
Danny Rawling was determined to have a bright average IQ, somewhere between like 110, 115. But Danny's poor childhood or mental illness was not going to be a saving grace for him. Danny Rawling ended up pleading guilty to the murders after years of gearing up for a high-profile trial in 1994. and he was sentenced to death on each count. He was executed by lethal injection on October 25th, 2006. In his final moments, he sang a religious hymn to the 47 witnesses.
Okay.
Screenwriter Kevin Williamson was inspired to write The Woodsboro Murders, which the script would later become Scream.
Really?
He used the case as inspiration for a horror movie which revolved around the murders of college students and the media frenzy that followed. In 1996, his screenplay, made it to the silver screen, becomes the iconic horror franchise, of course, Scream, all the sequels, and there's even a new Scream movie.
Yeah, I don't hold it in the same regard as the monster slasher, the big slasher guys. I'm sorry, I don't.
You don't?
No, Ghostface is not in there with Freddy, Jason, and Leatherface. I'm sorry.
Well,
Fight me.
You can have your own opinion.
Fight me. I noticed someone's out there like, oh, hell nah, right? But I do like the satirical elements of Scream, because there is that, mixed in throughout the entire, which I don't think I've even seen them all. But, yeah, Ghostface is, but that's pretty interesting that he based it, and now that you say that, I can kind of see, the connections and the inspiration. So that's kind of weird.
Yeah, he changed it around a bit. It became high school students. But he kind of really wanted to focus on the fact that, there was the media frenzy, and we have, the Courtney Cox character playing Gail Weathers.
I'm already watching you. That whole I can see you thing. Oh, my God, like Danny and the Peepin', dude. What?
So he definitely took inspiration from this case.
I'm stabbing.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
If you're curious about my resources for today's podcast, I read a book called A Monster of All Time by J.T. Hunter, another book called Gainesville Ripper, The True Story of Danny Rolling by Nikki Marshall, and various news articles, because this was, I guess, a relatively more modern case,
Well, and sensational,
80s,
too.
90s. And, of course, with the resurgence of interest in true crime, and everybody has a podcast now, there's a lot of material and articles and information about Danny. Yeah,
this is a brutal crimes. All these different victims, they were tortured, psychologically tortured. It's just horrible what he did to these people, and the way he started out and it kind of kept working up. It's textbook. You got possible infant head injury as an infant, possibly. The forceps were outlawed for a reason. And then you have the just horrible abusive treatment by his father. And it was like a checklist. They were hitting all of them. And then another head injury from a motorcycle injury. But I think he already had his issues fully blown by that. I don't think that might not have helped, but might have added to it. But he had no impulse control. And I think that's a very important characteristic amongst these people that end up being monsters and killers.
You think so?
The lack of impulse control. Yes, I do. And I'm not saying we're all sitting out there thinking about killing or, raping and murdering. But I do think that we all have been so mad, in our life that we maybe could lash out at someone in anger.
The thought might have crossed your mind.
It might have crossed your mind in a serious thought, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But you just don't do it because it's so far outside of what's acceptable by society. You instantly think about the consequences. Ooh, I don't want to go to jail, blah, blah, blah.
The moral compass.
The moral compass.
Understanding right from wrong.
Right. And these people.
Consequences of your actions.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It seemed like Danny didn't really have any concern about the consequences.
Or if he thought about it,
he was in prison multiple times for armed robbery, but he just kept fucking doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like, how many times do you have to get burned before you stop touching the stove, buddy?
Well, especially if you're not a good criminal. If you keep getting caught, right?
No, he's not a good criminal. He's pretty much a moron.
Yeah, if he thought about it, it was after he'd already done whatever.
I'm surprised. I feel like in the last couple months, I've been hearing a lot about the Gainesville Ripper, probably because the Scream movie came out. And I've seen a lot of articles of we'll find out the real story behind the movie kind of thing. But I'm actually surprised that Danny Rolling is not more of a big name. He's not... people don't associate him with the Gacy's and the Bundys, right?
Yeah,
but he's fucking horrible. He's just as bad as a Ted Bundy.
I mean, it's almost the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, short of the charm and actually,
I think it's kind of I don't know if interesting is the word, but there's something. I mean, that's just curious about the cases that kind of catch on, and people are like the top 10. Like we're still obsessing over the same cases, but then you have these other killers like Danny Rawling.
Sam Little.
Yeah.
My God, one of the most prolific serial killers ever, and possibly, up to 100 victims or so. And it's almost like I don't know why we concentrate.
Yeah, before we covered Sam Little, I didn't know a whole lot about him.
No.
And before we covered Danny, I had very minimal. I mean, I knew the case kinda, but I didn't know all the information.
No, and I don't know why we're just they got that top 10, and anyone who comes out with a new podcast, they always do their Manson episode, their Gacy episode, and all that stuff is fascinating. But I mean, damn. How many times can you hear that same case? I mean, and there's so many more cases that you've never heard of that are very disturbing.
Well, this case comes to us via a patron who requested that she wanted us to cover the Gainesville Ripper. And we do once in a while, occasionally, cover a bigger case, And I have to say, in researching this Gainesville Ripper case, I was very educated. I learned a lot that I did not know. And so hopefully by listening to this podcast, maybe you've learned a little something you didn't know about Danny Rawling.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie.
But if you have a listener story, we are collecting those. You can email mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, a great way to do that is by joining us at patreon.com/mountainmurderspodcast. Ad-free content, Discord chat, lots of fun stuff going on there. We have reformatted the show a little bit, Dylan. We've decided moving forward that our midweek show that we were calling Offbeat, where we covered just all sorts of wacky topics, and we're actually transitioning that over to our second podcast, Batshit Crazy. If you've listened to Batshit Crazy before, we're starting it up again, and we would love for you to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Do a search, find us, Batshit Crazy. We're going to be covering all the strange and unusual aliens and conspiracy theories and cryptids over on that podcast.
Yes, please join us. So we have a brand new episode of Batshit Crazy up, and we will continue to discuss the strange and weird.
With our midweek, what we were calling Offbeat, we're kind of going to focus more on true crime news, current events. That's going to be a bit more of a discussion show for us.
Yeah, and I want to do a bit called What's in Heather's Box on that episode as well.
Oh, God. Well, I don't know.
Letting you know.
Well, did you ask if it was okay to talk about my box?
Well, no, you're going to have a box. A little box.
Okay.
You're going to put an item in it, and you're going to give me subtle clues as to what might be in your box.
Okay, well, this will be fun.
I like that.
Yeah, you had the idea to do this a while back called What's in Mama's Bag?
What's in Mama's Bag? This is a game where we try to figure out what a woman has in her purse.
Well, just because it's I need a Band-Aid, and I'm like, oh, I got one of those, and you need a pen, or you need a stapler, or whatever, or a snack.
Phillips head
I'm like, wait a
screwdriver?
second, I think I have one of those in my giant bag. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so any other news that we need to get out there, Dylan?
No, I think you covered it all, and thank everyone for listening, and we hope that you try out some of the other ones that we're going to come forth with.
You mean Batshit Crazy?
Batshit Crazy, and the newly format. We're going to have fun on Offbeat. We're going to do, breaking news, headlines, dumb criminal news. I mean, I love
criminal news.
I love dumb criminal news. Florida man, Florida woman, North Carolina man, North Carolina woman, all the great stories. Oh, I can't wait. I'm invigorated.
I see that.
Woo.
You look jazzercised.
Damn.
All right.
I might even go out and buy me a chair I can stand to sit in.
Oh my gosh, you need a chair.
Getting crazy.
Yeah, he's sitting in this terrible little wooden chair that's very uncomfortable. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. My other chair died.
Your little butt is going to probably have little wooden slap marks in it, I would think.
You're going to have to rub it.
I'm not.
All right.
Okay, guys, we will be back on Wednesday again with our midweek show, and join us on Thursday for a brand new Batshit Crazy episode.
Hey.
All right. See you later. Have a great week.